Space Marine 2 is the modern Order 1886, was one of the names for this video that I considered, because it is to a degree I don't think I can overstate, incredibly, unbelievably, ridiculously, insanely visually impressive. This game was absolutely chock full of stunning vistas, and I have never been so consistently and often stun-locked by how pretty a game is. Unlike the Order 1886 though, this game has a huge focus on gameplay on top of being a tech demo. Usually when games portray giant battles in the distance, they're with cardboard cutouts. And while this game does have a little bit of that as well, that is a lot of cardboard cutouts. Just ignore how ridiculously out of the map the bot is in this clip. Some of these set pieces even play into gameplay too, with them becoming enemies that you can interact with. The Tyranids in general are done so remarkably well that this game felt like playing the first truly next-gen title that I've played in a very long time. The way they rush and swarm looks almost like a liquid, and it's not just a graphical effect. This is used for some gameplay stuff like how they climb up on walls by climbing on each other. Ultimately, seeing the giant ocean of Tyranids climb up at you is a bit one note from a pure gameplay standpoint. You're just kind of standing still and shooting at things. But it's so visually impressive that these sections were always something that I looked forward to. Tzeentch's Chaos Cult, the Thousand Suns, that show up later, are far less interesting both visually and gameplay-wise. Visually, none of them are even kind of as interesting as the Tyranids. Instead of pouring out through windows in a way that's oddly reminiscent of a water simulation, they just magically teleport in from blue explosions. The actual enemies themselves are far less in number as well. While the Tyranids have about a dozen enemy types, the Thousand Suns have 5. One of those, the cultists, are so irrelevant that they explode into viscera when you walk at them. 2 of which, the Rubric Marines and the Terminators, look extremely similar and demand the exact same tactics to beat. The last 2 Tzeentch enemies are Cygors and Sorcerers, the latter of which shows up maybe a half a dozen times total. The 40k games always manage to have some incredible environment design. Seriously, someone check on the environment artist to make sure that they're okay. The 3 main planets, or environments, are Jungle, Demacia, and the end section of Titanfall 2. The first 2 are amazing, but the latter is bathed in eternal night and so is intrinsically much less appealing to fight on. The stark white of Demacia was a great choice to make the blood stand out, except that there's no blood decals on walls. Very disappointing. When you are fighting Tyranids, the gore is beautiful. Enemies are drenched in blood, limbs fly off, and Hormagaunts are more often than not left dead and bisected. The Thousand Suns severely lack this element, both because Sangors are remarkably tanky, and because the Rubric Marines literally don't have blood to spill. There is a severe lack of any real feedback to hitting them because they don't visually change at all, whereas by contrast you can tell how damaged a warrior is by how much they look like they're on Doom cover art. As for how combat feels, well, the execution animations reminded me a little bit of For Honor. I can't think of any against the Tyranids that don't feel over-the-top brutal, and in trying to show that off, I ended up making the intro to this video on accident. You might as well go watch it again. Once again, the Thousand Suns aren't anywhere near as good, because Rubric Marines are just magic space dust, and they just kinda evaporate instead of getting satisfyingly bisected. Tzeentch is often fought in environments on Demeter, which look remarkably dull for how pretty they are. While the Tyranids are always fought outside in the day, the Thousand Suns are almost entirely fought indoors at night, and Demeter, presumably not having a sun, doesn't really help. I can always tell at a glance when a clip was recorded on Demeter, because the preview is consistently either completely unreadable or straight up pitch black. Though the interiors are nice, there's a not insignificant amount of times where I can't see shit, Cap'n. There's a weird focus on using fog as a balancing element in both single-player and multiplayer, which doesn't really work when you can press either one button to highlight an enemy, or when player names always show up through the fog, respectively. Visuals aside, the first and pretty much only thing that people actively go out of their way to hear about a 40k game's sound design is how the bolters sound and feel, and I'm happy to report that sound and vibe-wise, they got the bolters right. All of them. I'll get into how the bolters actually feel to wield in a bit. I want to talk about performance and polish first. And I have the perfect clip to start this off with, from a normal day on my battle barge. Had I finished the campaign and stopped playing, I would have reported almost no problems, but since then, the game has tried to dethrone Helldivers for bugginess. In increasing order of insanity, I've seen the run-of-the-mill bugs like executing people with your mind, Tyranids doing the moonwalk while stuck on my corpse, my camera getting possessed by chaos, skating around, enemies do it too. Then there's the much more egregious bugs like grapple refusing to work, grapple working too well, taking off into space so fast it would make NASA jealous, this Neurothrope trying to replicate my space program, this one trying to do so in reverse, inexplicably becoming an orc, and willing bolter rounds into my sniper rifle, replaying the parrying animation over and over again, being too busy looking at TikTok to shoot my gun, Tyranids contemplating the meaning of life instead of climbing walls, Carnifexes having a mental breakdown after not being able to find the stairs, this sniper bot making its own stairs, this assault bot not knowing what stairs are, getting shot through certain props, objectives getting trapped in the warp, Rubric Marines failing to revive and instead creating an audible portal to an industrial factory hellhole. Or my favorite two bugs, bots turning into Jesus Christ, and bots escaping out of the map to bathe in an 8th degree burn. None of these are game-breaking and honestly probably added to the experience because of how funny they were, especially the assault bot using nuke eject. Overall, this kind of stuff is expected for a AAA release these days, and that's only slightly depressing. Space Marine 2 is trying to be like its predecessor, with a heavy focus on swapping between ranged and melee combat. While the current iteration is fun, it's probably not as good as the first game. In Space Marine 1, you got health back from executions, but you could be damaged during them. This made you actually think about whether or not you had time to rip an orc's jaw off, or if you should just fertilize the ground with their corpse right away. In 2, when you rip a warrior's arm off and jam it down its throat, all of the other Tyranids politely wait and watch the horrible dismemberment of their friend because you're invincible. It doesn't heal you either, it just gives a pretty pitiful amount of ablative temporary armor health. Combat is far more range focused for 2 reasons. You can't heal from melee anymore, and there are a lot more Tyranids than there were orcs. You could comfortably slap 2 Gretchens, but 8 Hormagaunts, even with the wide swings of a chainsword, engaging them in melee is taking the fast road to death on higher difficulties. When you take damage, it turns into white health for a few seconds, which you can get back by doing damage like Bloodborne. You can get all of this back, and more, I'll talk about that later, with ranged weapons, so it's pretty much always optimal to backpedal while firing into the crowd, sometimes parrying and rolling when they get too deep. This is still fun, don't get me wrong, but there is very little incentive to actually use melee, apart from grabbing executions to become invulnerable. And to hammer this home, I want to talk about the control scheme that I settled on. By default, left-click shoots and right-click melees. I swapped parry or block from C to my right click because I was doing it just that much more often. For the record, this is a fine combat system. Game devs are smart people, and I'm sure they tried to make the first game's healing execution system work and decided it wasn't applicable to the Tyranids after playtesting it. I think they probably overcorrected a little too much and bumbled some weapon balance decisions. I don't think the game is too hard though. I was able to claw my way through the Hive Tyrant on Relic while level 2, and it's something that's only gotten easier since. The difficulty does have some major problems, but they're rooted in enemy variety and oversights or bugs. Oh, and Melta. To jump right into my main issue with the entire game as a whole, the Thousand Suns feel way worse to fight than the Tyranids, and this is due to 2, maybe 3 reasons. Having little to no damage feedback, almost always being fought at night, and most importantly, having half the enemies that the Tyranids do. To clarify, this is not an enemy count issue. The Thousand Suns don't wield the numbers that the Tyranids do, but that's not a problem. The fact that there are 5 enemy types is. By contrast, the Tyranids also have 5 warriors. There's the double sword guy, whip dude, and 3 ranged variants. The one with the ranged spikes, the one with the poison, and another with a laser gun. Each one of these fights so differently it almost feels wrong to label them all under the same name. That is on top of the Tyranids also having Hormagaunts, Termagaunts, Zoanthropes, Raveners, Lictors, and Gargoyles in the campaign. The Tyranids also have 2 mini-bosses, the Carnifex and the Neurothrope, versus the Thousand Suns one with just the Hellbrute. The Thousand Suns don't have any set-piece specific enemies like the Tyranids' Gargoyles either. As for proper bosses, the Tyranids only have the Hive Tyrant, while the Thousand Suns get a few shitty sorcerer fights, a glorified fight against an animatronic statue, and a genuinely really good final boss fight. The Hive Tyrant is so good that it's probably one of my favorite bosses in any game, and it made me realize I'd probably like Dark Souls quite a bit if it was 3-player co-op with copious amounts of firearms. Don't tell me to play Neo. To be fair about enemy variety, the Rubric Marines and Terminators also have variants, but they all operate extremely similarly from each other or demand the same response from the player. The Terminator variants are different from each other, but they show up so much less often that I don't even have footage of all of them. The vast majority of the time, you're fighting 3 enemies: Cultists, Zangors, and Rubrics. Let me compare the 3 Rubric variants with the 3 ranged warrior variants. Warrior with Barb Strangler forces you to be conscious of your positioning and the traps that they lay down. Warrior with Venom Cannon forces you to notice the audio stinger and or the laser and dodge. Warrior with Devourer forces you to see the projectile and either dodge or walk out of its path. Rubric with Bolter, dodge when their eyes light up. Rubric with Cannon, dodge when Simon says tell you to. Rubric with Flamer, dodge when Simon says tells you to. That honestly sums up all of my issues with enemy variety so succinctly that I'm just gonna stop talking about it now. I've got other bones to pick, and I can trust that you get the point. If you don't believe me, go play the game. I think these issues could have been remedied if there were more fights where you're engaging Tyranids and Thousand Sons at the same time. If they did implement this, but only for one section in one level, and it's in a side mission operation. In fact, you get to watch this happen outside the playable space, far more than you actually get to engage with it gameplay-wise. Because there's so few Thousand Sons enemies relative to Tyranids, if they were added as a side enemy on top of Tyranids, I think they would have worked really well. Making you fight them on their own for half the game was not a good idea. There is already a large environmental focus with explosive canisters every 2 feet that are appropriately deadly and satisfying to exploit. Treating the Thousand Sons as an extra environmental obstacle rather than a whole new enemy faction would have probably worked a lot better. Example, if there were things you could target and explode to summon a Thousand Sons reinforcement portal, which could be used to distract Tyranids should the situation prevent itself. It's honestly quite disappointing that the Tyranids were clearly given so much more dev time and then they got shelved halfway through for another faction that is much worse, but both factions do share some problems and some oversights. Sometimes animations don't quite line up right and you get unavoidably hit. This is a problem with both factions, but it's much more noticeable with Tyranids because of how much more often they're engaging you in melee. This is very noticeable when doing the perfect shot reaction off of parry. It doesn't give iframes, but it's supposed to make enemies recoil after you get the shot off. Sometimes it just doesn't, and you get hit anyway. Similarly, executions do give you iframes and so most of the time make you completely safe, but enemies sometimes start their attack combos at just the right time to hit you as you finish an execution, and there's no real way to stop this from happening or predict it. This means the combat system has unfortunately suffered the worst fate of all, sharing a problem with Death Stranding's melee system. These issues are to be expected from a combat system like this, and hopefully they'll get ironed out. I also hope they take away the Termagant's smart pistols, as sometimes they fire right through walls, and you'll die with no idea where it's coming from. Their projectile in general is weirdly nondescript and should be much more obvious. A projectile that is way too descript, by contrast, is Melta. It's unsurprising that the weapon that emits a giant fuck you cone is pretty good in the Horde shooter, but it's way too good. It's also, not what Melta is. In tabletop, Melta is pretty through and through a close quarters anti-armor weapon, like an anti-tank rifle if it only worked in pissing distance. It is not a gigantic horde killer, whatsoever. You point this thing at a tank and hope it hits somewhere lethal, not at a giant crowd to remove from existence. I always pictured it firing out a stream of extremely hot magma, similar to like a weapon from Cortex Command. Whatever this is certainly not that, and in turn it's completely changed its role from anti-armor to flamer, which is ironic because there is a flamer in the game, and it's relegated to a single story mission gimmick where it's terrible. Even the guardsmen don't want to use it and ditch it for lasguns that emit flames. I would normally table a complaint like this as pointless nitpicking from a tabletop nerd, but changing the role of Melta to literally the complete opposite of its intended role had the unintended side effect of making it the best weapon in the game by a very long mile. Playing Space Marine with and without a Melta gun are two entirely different experiences. Keep in mind that all of this footage is with the Vanguard's Melta gun, and that Heavy has an even bigger and better multi-Melta with a perk that effectively gives it infinite ammo. The Melta gun does so much damage that what difficulty you're playing on isn't really a concern. Other weapons feel wildly different based on difficulty. Namely, the bolters can feel exceptionally weak on Relic, but the Melta gun is always reliable and doesn't really feel the difficulty change at all. Not only does it make what difficulty you're playing on basically irrelevant, but it also comes with a fun bug or exploit that makes managing your health a complete cakewalk. You remember the white health mechanic I mentioned earlier, that you get when you take damage? If you do a shitload of damage all at once, it overflows and gives you back way more health than you should have. This happens on basically every single click with the Melta, and so your health bar will regularly look like a crypto stock exchange as it plummets down only to jump all the way back up again over and over in a chaotic fight. This will also lead to you strategically taking damage to get it all back again, which is extremely unintuitive and silly. Since I wrote and edited this has since been fixed. However, it doesn't really change the fact that Melta is absurdly good and is the optimal choice all the time. There could be ways to change this, though. If you always got a little bit of health back on dealing damage, regardless if you had white health or not, and capped healing in general to a certain amount per attack, I think it would fix this completely. Fast-firing weapons would get their place and feel a lot less horrible in the same breath that Melta is dethroned from being brutally overpowered. If you could always heal from taking damage, I think this would also help disincentivize what I think is a mainstay strategy right now, which is tactically inting and killing yourself when you reach certain checkpoints to clear mortal wounds on top of getting all your health and ammo back. While they're at it, I would maybe reduce the importance of the headshot damage multiplier. Especially with Thousand Suns, enemies' head hitboxes are like 5% of their total surface area, and the damage bonus you get from hitting these areas is really significant. 40k is not a setting where I would expect precision, and it being what seems like a flat 2 times damage buff is way too hard to ignore when enemies are as spongy as they are in higher difficulties, further making rapid-fire weapons with high spread feel like trying to shoot out of a tumble dryer. Outside of missions, there is progression which is split between classes and weapons. Some of it is gameplay changing, lots are varying colors of paint to huff. The progression is very aggressively mediocre. It seems like a system that was padded out and meant to have microtransactions, but there just aren't any. It's pretty grindy, but the game is fun enough that it didn't really bother me, which is impressive for someone with ADHD as bad as mine. When more operations release, it'll be a lot more tolerable. Right now, half the missions are kinda no-goes because they're focused on Thousand Suns, which are both harder to fight, and less satisfying to fight for the same reward. There is this mod to play some campaign missions and operations, and that definitely helps with the replayability issue. Though, beware, use at your own risk and all that, and it might not even work depending on when you watch this video. This game is definitely going to need its post-launch support. Not launching with Horde mode is absolutely insane. Sorry, please wait until next year. I expect some pretty imminent balance touch-ups, but nothing as drastic as the damaged health suggestion that I gave earlier. To secure my place as a prophet, expect an extremely deserved melt and nerf, followed by mass community outcry. Lots of the classes have really dull perks which you can barely feel, but Sniper has a few that are completely game-breaking levels of broken. Lingering Concealment doesn't have a cooldown, so you can break your cloak and immediately after using it get a free 2 seconds of cloak. Performed optimally, this means you can have 2 seconds of cloak every 6 seconds, and thanks to targeted shot, get free 75% extra damage shots with the highest damage weapons in the game. Hey look, someone made a video about that. You should go watch it, maybe. No, only after this one's done though. Even without the sniper perk, it's not really hard to run through levels, and a significant reason why it's so easy is because there's a complete lack of interesting or complex objectives in this game. There are 3 objectives in the whole game that aren't just shoot the thing or walk to the place to shoot the thing, and one of them could be good but is bizarrely slowly paced and terrible. Another is during the last operation mission, and I actually like it quite a lot. It is the standard shoot the things while the bar fills up objective, but it can get interrupted with you needing to press a button with a corresponding label that is randomized. It actually necessitates you using your eyes, and it would have been really nice if there was more of that. The Helldrake fight has something similar and it's much better for it, but the fight itself is basically just fighting a Disneyland animatronic, so there's only so much that can be done to improve it. The Gargoyle fights in the campaign are interesting because they force you to split your focus and weigh up if you need to shoot something killing you right now, or work on the thing that will make you lose. Pretty much every single other objective in the entire game is walking to a button to ride an elevator to press the next button. A quick and dirty fix to people speedrunning would be to absolutely crank the detection propagation. Essentially, make it so that if one Tyranid sees you, they all do. They're a hive mind after all, it's a little nonsensical that this isn't already how it works. I'm not sure you should ever be walking up on enemies who are unaware of you. It's a Tyranid swarm. They should be pouring out of the walls all of the time. Sure, you can get the drop on them at the beginning of a mission, but from then on, they should know where you are. I say, let them come. I want to fight more things, and knowing fighting is always suboptimal is a little disappointing in the game about fighting Tyranids. For the sake of completeness, I did want to cover everything, which is why this video took a month to make, pay me money on Patreon and all that, and everything does include the story. I can already see what people are going to say about me covering the story, which is who gives a shit about the story of a game called Space Marine, but I wanted to cover it because, well, the balls on these writers are insane. I don't care to give a story play-by-play, you can go to one of my subscribers for that, but the way they address the first game's loose plot threads made me feel like I was on crazy pills. For context, in Space Marine 1, the protagonist Titus is established to have some weird, inexplicable resistance or connection to the warp, which he gets inquisitioned for, and as the game's opening shows, put into the Death Watch for a century as penance. The connection to the warp is brought back several times, there is dialogue and conversations about it between the protagonists, and it's the whole focus of this extremely important story cutscene. And it's never explained or expanded upon. The ending legitimately implies that Titus is in fact just resistant to the warp because he's epic. This is like if in Star Wars, Luke could move shit with his mind just because he can. Don't ask. To have the balls to bring this up, have it be a main story point, but be embarrassed to even acknowledge it at the same time is absolutely crazy. The first third of the conversations in this game are Titus staunchly refusing to tell the other 2 protagonists anything to create really boring melodrama. It ends up recreating an exact problem the first game had, where dialogue is almost exclusively about the mission at hand, and there's basically no character stuff at all, to the point where there are clear opportunities to include that, and Titus literally says no.
Brother, what happened on Grya? Nothing good.
Can you be specific?
I would sooner focus on the mission at hand.
You are withholding information relevant to the mission at hand.
Mind yourself, Sergeant.
Your behavior has been erratic. You force your way into classified files. You tell us nothing. Gatriel, we deserve to know who is leading us.
This conversation is over.
If said mission was interesting, this might be passable, but it's not. It's not like the developers are incompetent and can't write compelling character banter. The side mission operations have an impressive amount of dialogue between the different classes, and they're pretty charming and well done. I especially like that Decimus the Vanguard can't stop talking shit.
If you would like to test how your devotion compared to mine, my blade is ready anytime.
After they kill the Hive Tyrant a third of the way through, Titus literally gets distracted with a side quest for the entire rest of the game, and the Tyranids are completely sidelined. It's a side quest about Tzeentch, who, well, is quite possibly the worst possible choice for antagonist, both narratively and gameplay-wise. As for how they work in the plot, Tzeentch, and thus the Thousand Sons, losing never makes any sense. Tzeentch is capable of precognition, so they should be literally incapable of losing, and so when they do, it's because the writer needs the antagonist to lose, and they have to throw their hands up and go, "Oh, but Tzeentch planned that actually," when that's nonsense. Gameplay-wise, Tzeentch is the ranged magic faction in the game with an extremely heavy melee focus. In the mix of an entertaining and agonizing coincidence, every other Chaos faction would have been a better choice. Khorne is all about screaming with axes, Nurgle's poison and vomiting requires close range, and Slaanesh comes from behind to penetrate your armor. Once again, this manages to be a problem exactly recreated from Game 1. Chaos shows up halfway through, is more range focused, and so throws the entire established gameplay structure out the window, and is kind of awful as a result, and not as fun to fight as the other faction. As I'm sure 40k fans will know, this is actually a reference to the setting's theme of stagnation, and is not a fault with the game at all. At the end, you watch Lord Calgar show up and proceeds to become the protagonist of the story for the last 30 minutes, which was something that was extremely baffling to experience firsthand without knowing who this guy was. I now know this dude is extremely popular, so it was on me, but I will never forget the experience of basically watching the writer shove their really cool superhero into the story so hard that they usurped the title of protagonist. They loved him so much, in fact, that all 3 of the game's pre-rendered cutscenes have him in it, all in that last 30 minutes. These came out of nowhere, and to me it screams Games Workshop trying to make sure their important tabletop figure looks the best possible. Huh, he has the most important ability in all of tabletop. That must just be a coincidence. It's not the only sign of Games Workshop meddling. The developers pretty much admitted that the reason there are arbitrary class locks in multiplayer is thanks to GW. According to Games Workshop, in the thousands and thousands of years that Chaos has existed, no Khorne-loving World Eater has ever picked up a sniper rifle. You want to play a sniper as anything except Alpha Legion? That would be breaking the lore. Oh yeah, the multiplayer. It's fine. There are changes to some of the classes in PvP that really seem like they should have been baseline, but aside from that, there's so little to talk about that it's almost impressive. It's a multiplayer shooter with no interesting objectives and no mobility focus, so Sniper is incredibly overpowered and Melee is terrible to the surprise of no one. This is quite possibly the exact opposite of what you're buying the game for, so it doesn't really matter. Space Marine 2 is probably worth $60 now, and definitely worth it after additional content comes and the Horde mode releases. I really had low expectations after going in, but was really pleasantly surprised by this game. The incredible art direction alone makes the campaign worth a look, assuming you have a PC from the last 5 years or so, that is. If you don't, sorry, you don't get to engage with modern gaming, because Nvidia has made optimization a myth so they can sell better cards. Evidently, I was quite taken by this game as I made quite a few second channel videos about it, which is way more than I've made for any other game. Go check them out if you like it. Anyway, stick around and I may or may not have a Titanfall flavored surprise coming to 40k soon, and you can watch videos on that here, though the proper project will, at the time of writing, be out soon. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill about that. Thanks to my patrons, Emmy and Potato especially. Have a good night.